Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going deep into the work. It's a method for tackling stress and finding peace. It was developed by Byron Katie. And, her story is incredible. She struggled with severe depression for 10 years, even spent 2 years bedridden.
Wow.
And then, bam, a life-altering realization just completely changed everything.
It makes you wonder, right? Like, how do you go from that level of despair, right, to developing a method that's now used by people all over the world?
Yeah.
What was that turning point for her?
Exactly. You sent us the text, the work of Byron Katie, an introduction. And honestly, after reading her story, I was hooked. I was like, what did she figure out?
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? Because her method, the work, is so incredibly straightforward, almost deceptively simple.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. It's also grounded in modern neuroscience. So you have this really compelling blend of powerful personal experience and solid scientific backing.
Ooh, okay. I'm all ears. Break this down for me. What's the core idea here?
At its heart, Katie's work is about this.
Yeah.
Suffering comes from believing thoughts, thoughts that argue with reality.
Yeah.
It's not about changing the world to fit what we think should be happening.
Right.
It's about questioning those very thoughts themselves.
That makes sense. The text used this analogy that really stuck with me. It said it's like trying to teach a cat to bark.
Oh, yeah.
It's never going to happen no matter how hard you try.
Right.
So why are we fighting the very nature of things?
Yeah, it's a perfect example. And, it's more than just a funny image, right? Think about all the energy that we expend resisting reality. It's exhausting.
It is.
But here's the empowering flip side. When we stop resisting, we can finally see clearly. We find intelligent solutions. We act with more kindness. And honestly, we're less afraid to take action because we're not battling reality every step of the way.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could be really helpful. But how do we actually do this? Where do we even begin?
Well, Katie really emphasizes this idea of staying in your own business.
Okay.
Sounds simple, but it's really profound. And she breaks it down into 3 categories.
Okay.
My business, your business, and God's business.
Hold on. God's business? That sounds a little, esoteric for a method that's rooted in neuroscience.
Right. Yeah, and it's important to clarify that here, God really means reality itself. Everything that's outside our control. Think about it. The weather, other people's choices, the past. These are all outside our sphere of influence.
Ah, okay, that makes more sense. But how does this whole business idea apply to, my everyday life?
Well, think about how often you get caught up in other people's business, right? We do it all the time. He should get a promotion. She needs to be more organized. They shouldn't be so loud. These kinds of thoughts, they pull us out of our own lives and create a sense of separation.
Wow, you're right. I do that constantly. And if I'm being honest, it doesn't exactly make me feel happy or connected to people. Is that what Katie means by suffering?
Exactly. Mentally living in other people's business is a recipe for loneliness, resentment, and a whole lot of wondering why our own lives aren't working out the way we want.
Right.
And here's the thing. Even when we do this in the name of love, wanting what's best for someone, it still creates this tension, right? It can come across as arrogant. Like we know better than they do what's right for their life.
Yeah, that's a huge insight. Even with good intentions, trying to control other people's lives it doesn't really work. Okay, so if we're spending all this time in other people's business, what should we be focusing on instead?
That's where our own business comes in. It's about knowing what's right for ourselves.
Okay.
What are our values, our needs, our goals? When we're clear about those things, we can act from a place of integrity and make choices that align with who we truly are.
Okay, this is starting to click for me. But here's a question. What about our thoughts about ourselves? Do those count as our own business or someone else's?
Ooh, that's where things get even more interesting. Katie says that our thoughts themselves are harmless. It's when we believe them without question that the trouble starts.
So it's not the thought itself that's the problem, it's the attachment to it.
Exactly. It's like she says in the text, we're being breathed, being thought. Thoughts are like clouds passing through the sky or raindrops falling. They're impermanent, impersonal, until we try to grasp onto them.
I love that analogy. It's so simple but so powerful. Like you wouldn't try to hold on to a raindrop, right? It would just slip through your fingers. So why do we do that with our thoughts?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that idea of inquiry right? Katie's whole method is about questioning our thoughts, not just accepting them as truth.
So instead of being controlled by our thoughts, we learn to examine them.
Exactly. We become the observer of our thoughts rather than the slave to them. It's a subtle shift, but it can have a profound impact on how we experience life.
Okay, I'm ready to learn how to do this. What's the first step?
The first step is incredibly simple, but it can be surprisingly challenging. It's about getting those stressful thoughts out of our heads and onto paper. Katie encourages us to write down our thoughts about a specific person or situation that's causing us pain.
So I'm guessing this isn't about being nice or sugarcoating things.
Not at all. This is about radical honesty, you know. It's about giving ourselves permission to express what we often suppress.
Okay.
Those petty or judgmental thoughts, write them down. Remember, we're not trying to judge ourselves for having these thoughts. We're simply acknowledging them so we can work with them.
I can see how that could be really helpful. It's like shining a light on those thoughts we usually try to keep hidden in the dark.
Yeah.
And once those thoughts are out in the open, what do we do with them?
That's where the real magic happens. Katie has developed this incredible tool called the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. It's not about actually judging anyone, but about getting really honest with ourselves about what we're believing. And she even suggests starting with someone we haven't fully forgiven.
Wait, why someone we haven't forgiven? Shouldn't we start with something easier?
I know, right?
Yeah.
It might seem counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But there's a reason for this. It's about addressing that unresolved 1%.
Yeah.
You see, even the smallest bit of resentment or unresolved conflict, it can have this ripple effect on all our other relationships. It's like a tiny pebble creating waves in a pond.
I see what you mean. So by working through those tougher emotions, we actually start to heal and create more space for love and connection in all areas of our lives.
Exactly. And by focusing outwardly, we start to gain a clearer understanding of ourselves. We begin to recognize how much we project our own thinking onto the world and how those projections create our experience of reality.
So it's not really about the other person at all. It's about using that relationship as a mirror to see ourselves more clearly.
Yes.
I like that. But how does the worksheet actually work?
Well, the text provides a sample worksheet that Katie herself filled out. It's pretty eye-opening. You basically write down your judgments about this person. Again, no holding back here.
Right.
And then what's really cool is you take each one of those statements and put it through a series of 4 powerful questions.
Okay, I'm really intrigued. Let's take a break and come back to explore those 4 questions in detail in the next part. All right, we're back and ready to dive into these 4 questions that are at the heart of the work. I have to admit, I'm a little nervous. It sounds like this could get pretty intense.
You and me both.
But
It can be challenging, but in the best possible way. It's like shining a light into those dusty corners of our minds, you know,
yeah.
and seeing what's really there.
So walk me through it. What's the first question we ask ourselves about these stressful thoughts that we wrote down?
The first question is deceptively simple. Is it true? And remember, we're answering with a straightforward yes or no. No justifying, no explaining, just a gut-level response.
Just yes or no. That sounds easy enough, but I bet it's harder than it seems.
Absolutely. We're so used to defending our thoughts, rationalizing them, building entire narratives around them.
Right.
This question forces us to strip all that away and get to the core truth of the belief.
Okay, so let's say I wrote down the thought, my boss doesn't appreciate my work. If I ask myself, is it true? I might initially say yes, because, well, it feels true in the moment.
Exactly.
Yep.
And that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
The point isn't to force ourselves to see things differently.
Right.
It's about becoming aware of what we're actually believing,
Okay.
but it doesn't stop there.
Mm.
The second question takes us even deeper.
Okay, what's the second question?
It's this. Can you absolutely know that it's true? This is where we really start to challenge our assumptions.
So in the example of my boss, I might think, well, I don't get a lot of positive feedback, and I haven't gotten a raise in a while, but can I absolutely know that my boss doesn't appreciate my work? Maybe not.
Right. There might be other factors at play that you're not even aware of. Maybe the company's going through financial difficulties.
Right.
Or maybe your boss just has a different communication style. The point is, we rarely have all the information.
Right.
What we perceive as absolute truth is often just a collection of our own interpretations and assumptions.
This is making me realize how much I just jump to conclusions. Just 2 questions in, and I'm already seeing things in a new light.
That's the power of inquiry. It helps us loosen the grip of those limiting beliefs and create space for new possibilities.
Okay, I'm ready for question number 3. Hit me with it.
The third question gets to the heart of how our thoughts impact our lives. It's, how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? This is where we start to see the direct connection between our thoughts and our emotions, our behaviors, our entire experience of the world.
So if I believe my boss doesn't appreciate my work, how does that affect me? Well, I probably feel resentful, maybe even a little demotivated. I might not put as much effort into my projects. I might even start to withdraw from my colleagues.
Exactly. You see how that one thought can create this cascade of negative emotions and behaviors. It's like a snowball effect.
Huh.
And all of that contributes to our suffering.
Wow, it's amazing how much power we give our thoughts without even realizing it. Okay, bring on the final question. I'm ready to see where this goes.
The fourth question is perhaps the most transformative of all. It's, who would you be without the thought? This is where we get to glimpse the freedom that's possible when we detach from those limiting beliefs.
So if I could just let go of the belief that my boss doesn't appreciate me, who would I be? What would that feel like? I imagine I'd feel lighter, more confident, maybe even more open to connecting with my boss and colleagues.
Exactly. You see how simply by dropping that thought, your whole perspective shifts.
Yep.
You can show up differently, interact differently, and ultimately create a more positive experience for yourself.
Okay, these 4 questions are seriously blowing my mind. They're so simple yet so profound.
Right. And here's the thing. This is just the beginning.
Oh, there's more?
We've explored the first part of the work, but there's another equally important step that takes this process even further.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. What's the next step?
It's called the turnaround. And I have to say, this is where things get really exciting.
A turnaround? What exactly does that mean?
Well, instead of just questioning our thoughts, we actively shift our perspective by finding opposite statements that could also be true.
So we're basically flipping the script on those negative thoughts.
Exactly. And here's the really cool part. By supporting those turnarounds with genuine examples from our own experience, we start to loosen the grip of that original thought
Okay.
and open up to a whole new way of understanding the situation.
Okay, this sounds fascinating, but I'm having trouble picturing how this works in practice. Can you give me an example?
Absolutely. In the text, Katie uses the example of the thought, he doesn't listen to me.
Okay.
Let's explore how we might apply the turnarounds to that thought.
Perfect. Let's do it. This is definitely something I struggle with in my own relationships.
We all do. So the first type of turnaround is turning it to the self. So instead of, he doesn't listen to me, we might say, I don't listen to myself.
Interesting. I guess that could be true in a lot of ways. Maybe I'm not paying attention to my own needs, or I'm ignoring my intuition.
Exactly. And sometimes when we feel unheard by others, it's because we're not truly listening to ourselves. It's like we're so busy trying to get our point across that we forget to tune in to our own inner wisdom.
Wow, that's powerful. So what's the next type of turnaround?
The next one is turning it to the other person. So the statement becomes, I don't listen to him.
Ah, I see. So it's about shifting the focus from blaming the other person to recognizing our own role in the dynamic. I can see how that could create more empathy and understanding.
Exactly. It's not about letting the other person off the hook. It's about recognizing that we all have our own perspectives, and that true communication requires a willingness to listen to each other with an open heart and mind. And, sometimes we might discover that we haven't really been listening at all. We've been so caught up in our own stories, our own assumptions, that we haven't truly heard what the other person is saying.
That's so true. I know I've been guilty of that myself. Okay, so we've got I don't listen to myself and I don't listen to him. What's the final turnaround?
The final turnaround is turning it to the opposite. In this case, it would be, he does listen to me.
Wait, really? Even if it feels like he never listens?
Yes. This is about challenging our initial negative thought and finding evidence that contradicts it. Now, this doesn't mean we have to pretend everything is perfect. It's simply about recognizing that even in challenging situations, there are often moments where the other person is actually demonstrating the behavior we desire.
Okay, so I might think about times when my partner has actually listened attentively, or times when he's taken my suggestions to heart, even if it doesn't happen all the time. It's about focusing on those glimmers of hope, those moments of connection, rather than fixating on the negative.
Exactly. And sometimes just the act of looking for those moments can shift our entire perception of the relationship. It's like we're retraining our brains to focus on the positive rather than the negative. And this isn't about denying the challenges. It's about recognizing that reality is rarely black and white.
Yeah.
It's full of nuance and complexity.
This is such a refreshing perspective. It's like you said earlier, it's about finding freedom, not blame.
Right. And the beauty of the turnarounds is that they don't require us to be right or wrong. They simply invite us to explore different perspectives and see the situation from multiple angles.
This is making me realize how much I get stuck in my own limited point of view, and it's exhausting.
It is. But here's the good news. The more we practice the turnarounds, the more open-minded and flexible we become. We start to see that there's always more than one way to look at things. And that creates a sense of spaciousness and freedom within ourselves. We're less reactive, less judgmental, and ultimately more at peace with ourselves and the world around us.
As we're talking about acceptance, I keep thinking about that quote from Katie. When I am perfectly clear what is what I want, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that whole idea. Does it mean we should never want to change anything in our lives?
That's a great question, and it's one I wrestled with myself when I first started exploring Katie's work. It's easy to misunderstand that quote and think it means we should just become passive or complacent, but it's actually quite the opposite. It's about aligning ourselves with reality in such a way that our wants and desires naturally flow from a place of deep acceptance.
So it's not about giving up on our dreams or settling for less, but about recognizing that true fulfillment comes from working with reality rather than against it.
Exactly. It's about becoming more conscious of our thoughts and beliefs and seeing if they're supporting or hindering our goals. Sometimes what we think we want is actually based on fear, insecurity, or a distorted view of ourselves and the world. And the work helps us kind of uncover those limiting beliefs and replace them with thoughts that are more aligned with our true nature and our highest aspirations.
This reminds me of something Katie said in the questions and answers section. She was asked about loving what is and whether it means never wanting anything. And her response was, my experience is that I do want something all the time. What I want is what is. It sounds like she's saying desire is a natural part of the human experience, but it's the attachment to our desires, the struggle to make things different from what they are that creates suffering.
Absolutely. Katie emphasizes that it's not about suppressing our desires, but about becoming more conscious of them and questioning whether they're rooted in truth or in fear. When we're caught up in the shoulds and the shouldn'ts, when we're constantly striving for something that's just out of reach, we miss the beauty and abundance that's already present in our lives.
It's like we're so focused on getting to some future destination that we forget to appreciate the journey itself.
Precisely. And the irony is that when we surrender to what is, when we embrace the present moment with all its imperfections, we often find that the very things we were striving for naturally come into our lives. It's not because we've given up on our dreams, but because we've aligned ourselves with the flow of life and allowed things to unfold in their own time and in their own way.
This is making me realize how much I resist the present moment. I'm always thinking about what needs to be done, what I need to fix, what I could be doing better, and it's exhausting.
It is, and it prevents us from experiencing the joy and peace that comes from simply being present with what is.
Yeah.
Katie often says that when we argue with reality, we lose, but only 100% of the time.
That's a good reminder. So how do we start shifting this pattern? How do we cultivate more acceptance and presence in our lives?
Well, the work itself is a powerful practice for cultivating acceptance. By questioning our thoughts, we start to see that they're not facts, they're just interpretations. And when we see through those interpretations, we create space for a more open, compassionate, and accepting view of ourselves and the world around us.
So each time we do the work, we're essentially practicing acceptance. We're training our minds to become less reactive and more responsive to whatever life throws our way.
Exactly. And it's not a one-time fix. It's an ongoing practice, a way of life. The more we do the work, the more we cultivate a sense of inner peace and freedom that's not dependent on external circumstances. We become less attached to outcomes, less invested in being right, and more open to seeing things from multiple perspectives.
This has been such a helpful exploration. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools for dealing with stress and finding more peace in my life. But before we wrap up, I wanted to share a quote from Katie that that really resonated with me. She says, if you find anything lacking in your life, what thoughts are you believing that might be preventing you from seeing the abundance that's already present? I think that's such a powerful question to reflect on.
It is. It challenges us to look beyond the surface and examine the beliefs that shape our experience of reality. What if, instead of focusing on what we lack, we started to see the world through the lens of abundance? What if we shifted our attention to all the good that's already present in our lives? The loving relationships, the meaningful work, the simple pleasures that bring us joy. What if we allowed ourselves to fully appreciate those gifts rather than constantly searching for something more?
That's a beautiful invitation to shift our focus from scarcity to abundance, from lack to gratitude, from fear to love. It's a radical shift in perspective, but it's one that can lead to profound transformation in our lives.
And it all starts with awareness. By becoming more conscious of our thoughts and beliefs, we can begin to choose thoughts that empower us, thoughts that create more peace, joy, and abundance in our lives.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the work of Byron Katie. It's been an incredibly insightful journey, and I hope our listeners have gained some valuable tools and perspectives they can apply to their own lives.
If you're intrigued by what you've heard today, I encourage you to explore Katie's work further. Her books, website, workshops, and other resources offer a wealth of wisdom and practical guidance for anyone seeking a more peaceful and fulfilling life.
And remember, the journey of self-discovery is ongoing. There's always more to learn, more to question, more to embrace. Keep an open mind, keep exploring, and keep doing the work. You might be surprised by what you discover about yourself and the world around you.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.